much for coming. I don't know if you thank me so much in the end of it, because you're going to be pretty sad. I'm going to mention a lot of information during this lecture, a lot of websites, studies, etc., etc., etc. No need to write. Following this lecture, whoever put their email address on that sheet of paper, we will send you a document that have links to the website, to the studies, and other links that will help you in your own research. I don't want you to believe anything I say tonight. I want you to go home and do your own research and see if you can believe me or not. So don't worry about those notes. You're going to get an email with the information as long as you put your name on the email list. So how did I get to this? So I'm a head of organization called We Are the Evidence, and it's called We Are the Evidence because not only we have more than ample scientific evidence that wireless technology radiation is harmful to almost every system and organ in the human body, we already have the human evidence, and that's why we said we are the evidence. We do science to essentially warn us of what's going to happen to people, and all of this bad stuff that science warned us of happens. And you know, when I was in Israel, one day I was contacted by a journalist. Everyone hears me, by the way? Yeah. So I was contacted by a journalist of a paper which is the equivalent of the Wall Street Journal. And she asked me, Daphna, so how many people are sick? And I said, I'm going to give you a number that will sound crazy and you'll doubt my credibility, but by the end of our conversation, I will prove you that I'm right. And I'm going to do the same thing tonight. So I'm going to put a very high bar, and I'm going to tell you that probably 50% of the population already suffering from various conditions as a result of exposure to wireless technology radiation. So I'm an attorney in New York and in Israel, and I used to be a telecommunication officer in the Israeli army. I was telecommunication and computer officer. I managed the computer center for the operations center and headquarters of the Israeli army. So wireless really was my profession. As a result, I was early adopter and avid user of wireless technology. And while most women like to go and buy shoes and bags, I actually like to buy gadgets. And I was always the go-to person when people needed to buy anything. I really liked researching all these specs of electronics. And so in 2009, my ex-husband, who is an MD, he has a PhD in molecular biology, he got a job at Princeton University. And before that, I was working in Manhattan investment company, and we moved to Princeton. And I thought that would be a good time to start a family. And I decided that I want to work for myself because I don't want to be slave of any employer and raise my children the way I want to. And so I decided to start my own law practice, and I had to buy a new laptop. So I went to buy a new laptop, I come back home, and I want to check my laptop, and weird things started to happen. The area on the left of the mouse pad started vibrating, and I would get this tingling feeling in my fingers, my feet. I leave the computer, and I'm fine. I ended up, I said, you know, something wrong with the laptop, no problem. I'll return it and get a new one. And that's what I did. And eventually, I ended up changing 5 laptops in 3 weeks. And with every laptop, I was getting more and more symptoms. I couldn't breathe. I felt like heat in my face. I would get an immediate headache. My heart was jumping, nausea. Really weird things started to happen. And with my 3rd laptop, I remember that incident. My ex-husband was talking to me, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. There was like a cognitive block in my brain. And the first search I did was heart jumping when using a laptop. I was 36, I was pretty fit at the time, and why would my heart jump? And I went online and I got to a Dell website, and I saw dozens and dozens of people complaining about the same things. And I remember this woman who was writing that her fetus was kicking every time she was using her laptop. So suddenly, I also could not use my cell phone. Every time I use my cell phone, I feel very, very sharp pain inside my brain. And in the beginning, I thought, oh, I wanted to believe that this is going to go away somehow, but it didn't. And within 6 months, I could not tolerate anything with wireless radiation. I could not be anywhere with wireless radiation, which means everywhere. And I started living in my car, desperately trying to find places that I can sleep without radiation. And sleep is a generous word. I don't think I slept for a year. I lived in my car for a year. And I can assure you, sleeping in my car was never on my life plan. And eventually, I decided that I must remove myself completely from the world, from the wireless environment, because if you have a wound and you keep on scratching it, it's not going to heal. And so if I want to get better, I have to be in a place without radiation. I moved upstate New York to the Catskills, which is a natural reserve in upstate New York. I rented a very isolated cabin in the middle of the woods. No neighbors, cell towers 7 miles away, more bears than men. And I spent there 4 years, and that really saved my life. And when something you used to love so much can destroy your life to such an extent, you want to understand how come you never heard anything about it. And so I started digging in and trying to understand that and learn the evidence. And what I found out was really mind-blowing. And I was in Michigan a week ago, and in one of my meetings I met with a CEO of a school, of a private Catholic school. And the meeting was supposed to take 1 hour, and it lasted 3 hours, because after 1 hour of the presentation, he really could not get up. And he actually looked at those mothers who brought me and said, I apologize for harming your children. And in the end of the meeting, he told me, this is really mind-blowing. And as I said, it is. So before I'm going to go into what it is that I learned, I know people here have different backgrounds. So I want you to be able to understand everything I'm saying beyond my accent. And so I'm going to go into a few concepts that has to do with this technology and radiation. And I know words like electricity, frequencies, etc. can be very scary. I promise you that by the end of my explanation, everyone here will understand. So let's start. So when you see light, when you hear radio, when you talk on a phone, when you text, all of this is data that is being transferred on waves, on electromagnetic waves. And another word for waves is frequency, okay? And the difference between all of those waves, the wave of the light and the wave of the cell phone, is how many oscillations per second that wave has. So a wave, or a frequency, of 1 hertz, and hertz is the unit we use to measure how many oscillations per second that wave or that frequency has, means a frequency that has 1 oscillations per second. A frequency of 60 hertz, which is the frequency we use for our house electricity, means that we have a wave or frequency of 60 oscillations per second. Now, Wi-Fi uses a frequency of 2.45 gigahertz. That means 2,450,000,000 oscillations per second. So if the house electricity is very low frequency, Wi-Fi is quite high in comparison. Now the collection, so far so good?
Yeah.
Okay. So the collection of all of those frequencies is part of what is known as the electromagnetic spectrum. And we divide this collection of frequencies to groups. And we do that because each group of frequencies has a little bit different characteristic than the rest of the groups. So if you cannot read, don't worry. All you have to notice is that there are different colors. Each different color represents a different group of frequencies. So if we go here, we have extremely low frequencies. That's where our house electricity frequencies are. Very low frequencies, then radio waves and microwaves, which are the frequencies we use for wireless technology. Then we have infrared radiation, visible light, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, and gamma rays. Now, Radio wave is the yellow, microwave is the orange. The reason you can see the yellow covering the orange of the microwave is because sometimes we consider microwave frequencies as a subgroup of the radio frequencies, and sometimes we use it as a separate. If you go and look online, sometimes the spectrum will consider microwave as a separate, sometimes a subgroup. But for our purposes, it's more or less the same. So if after this lecture you're going to go online and go and read studies, whenever you see studies that refer to radio frequencies or studies that refer to microwave frequencies, those are essentially studies that are relevant for the issue of wireless technology radiation. Now, if you can see, that table is divided to two. You see that blue line here? So on your right, those are essentially frequencies that are called ionizing frequencies that emit ionizing radiation. On your left, it will be frequencies, there are low frequencies, that are non-ionizing frequencies that emit non-ionizing radiation. It's too loud? Are you okay? Should I reduce it? How do you reduce the volume? No?
Move it further. Just further from your mouth.
That's like exercising my lecturing.
Was that too loud?
I think, yeah, I feel some people feel that it's too loud.
Okay, try it.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
A little bit louder. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's start with the ionizing frequencies that emit ionizing radiation. So what does it mean? Ionizing frequencies, as you can see, are higher frequencies on a spectrum, and therefore they have more energy. They have sufficient energy to pull an electron out of the atom. And that creates a process that is called ionization. Again, those frequencies are higher frequencies, they have enough energy to pull an electron out of the atom, and therefore they create a process called ionization. Now, since they're causing an immediate bioeffect, right, they create bioeffect in our body, it's easy for us to assume that they're harmful. And now, when you go and do an X-ray, X-ray are basically in the group of ionizing frequencies that emit ionizing radiation. They cover you with apron to cover those areas in your body that are not supposed to get this radiation because it's harmful. And they're using a lead apron because it contains metal that blocks radiation. So while we now accept it as true and absolute true that ionizing frequencies can cause damage, that was not so much long ago. So my father is in his 70s, and when he went to buy shoes, they actually had X-ray machines in the shoe stores to make sure that the shoe fits. And there was a doctor, she was a gynecologist, and she noticed that a lot of the women who come to her clinic with children that were born with defects had X-rays when they were pregnant. So she thought that there might be a correlation between the X-rays to the defects in the children. And when she published a paper to that effect, she was kind of like outcast by the medical establishment. But now we accept that ionizing frequencies that emit ionizing radiation are harmful. What about non-ionizing frequencies? So non-ionizing frequencies are frequencies that do not have sufficient energy to pull an electron out of the atom. So they do not cause ionization. So there's no immediate bioeffect. Now, the assumption was or is that therefore they're not harmful unless, and that's important, unless they're being transmitted in such an intensity with such strength that they change the temperature in our body. So they essentially create what's called a thermal effect. And I repeat that. So non-ionizing frequencies do not have sufficient energy to cause ionization. Therefore, we assume that they are not harmful unless they're being transmitted in such an intensity, in such strength, that they create a change in temperature in our body, and therefore create what's called the thermal effect. Okay? Okay. So the thing is about this assumption, it is an assumption. It's nothing that was ever proven positively. Moreover, it was actually proven false already 45 years ago. Nevertheless, this is the assumption on which wireless technology is based. Since wireless technology devices allegedly do not emit radiation in intensity that is causing a thermal effect, therefore they are not harmful. Now let's see if that assumption is true. So the first time we really used microwave frequencies massively was just before World War II, when we invented radars. Radars, just like wireless technology devices, using microwave frequencies in non-thermal levels. Actually, it's more or less the same group of frequencies we use for wireless technology. And the Navy was using radars in World War II, and following World War II, a lot of the soldiers started to complain about the same symptoms that people with my condition complaining about. Headaches, nausea, flu-like symptoms that don't go away, heart palpitations. A lot of them were getting actually psychological effects, which is not surprising. And the Navy decided to check whether or not there is some evidence that their symptoms can actually be caused by this radiation. So the Navy brought a scientist, his name was Dr. Zori Glaser, and his job was to collect every scientific study that was done on microwave frequencies that's showing health effects. Now, it took him a long time. It took him 10 years. You can assume there was no internet. At the time, we were at the time of the Cold War with Russia, and actually they were doing quite well and doing a lot of science because their soldiers also complained about the same thing, and he had to translate a lot of the studies. And so 10 years later, he published a report, and this is the report. I actually have an image here. Okay. So this is the report. Hold on. This is the report, and it says, Naval Medical Research Institute, bibliography of reported biological phenomena, effects, and clinical manifestation attributed to microwave and radio frequency radiation. October 4th, 1971. This is the list of studies. And we actually have the boxes for all the studies. So while we are now being told that there's no evidence that microwave frequencies can cause health effects, at 1971, Dr. Glaser had 2,311 studies. Now, in this report, there are actually 5 pages in which he summarizes all the effects that his studies found. And I'm going to read you a few of them. Let me get them out. Okay, so central nervous system effects, autonomic nervous system effects, peripheral nervous system effects, psychological disorders such as depression, impotence, anxiety, dizziness, sleeplessness, insomnia, behavioral changes, blood disorders, vascular disorders, metabolic disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, endocrine gland changes, etc., etc., etc. And that is 1971. So already 1971, we have human evidence of the soldiers getting sick, and we have scientific evidence showing that these symptoms can be caused by exposure to microwave radiation. Now, Dr. Glaser updated his report in 1976, and it included 3,700 studies. And in 1984, the Radiation Board of our government asked him to update the report, and he had 5,083 studies. Now, in 1973, the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, approved cell phones. However, it took them 10 more years to actually commercialize them because they needed to create an infrastructure of antennas. So 1984, the same year we commercialized cell phone, we had 5,000 studies proving that this radiation is harmful almost to every system in our body. Nevertheless, we commercialized cell phones. Now, you ask how this could happen, right? I mean, how can it be that we will do that? Well, the answer is pretty simple. I think comparison is inevitable. Tobacco industry, right? So there's, I don't know if you watched the movie Thank You for Smoking. Anyone did? Okay. Whoever didn't have to watch it. This is one of my favorite movies, really brilliant. And it talks about tobacco fraud. So I don't know if you know, but the tobacco fraud was done through public relations company. They developed something called the product, I forgot the word. They developed a strategy how to basically defraud the public to believing that there is no problem. And in the tobacco litigation, they actually had a document, they found very important documents called the Doubt document, that one of the tobacco industry executive was writing, doubt is our product. We do not sell, they don't really sell cigarettes or tobacco, they sell doubt, because as long as the people will have doubt, their cognitive dissonance will make them believe that cigarettes are safe and there's nothing to worry about. Same thing happened with wireless technology. So essentially, the wireless industry has been following the tobacco industry playbook and perfected it. So going back to that movie, so this movie is about the PR person for the tobacco industry. And in the end of the movie, he was sitting in his office with his new clients. Guess who the clients were? The wireless industry. And he asked them, gentlemen, are cell phones safe? And they all started talking, blah, blah. I said, stop. Gentlemen, practice in front of the mirror. While we're constantly exploring the issue, so far there is no evidence that correlates cell phone to cancer. And that's how they do it. And we believe them. So what happened since? So for example, there's a lot of other Army documents that show evidence of effect. There is a NASA document from 1981. There is a document here from the Air Force. And in its conclusion, it said, evidence is clear that there are bioeffects to human processes from low-intensity microwave radiation. And they actually call this radiation low intensity. Why? Because it's not an intensity that creates thermal effect. But that intensity is actually about 1 trillion times higher than what our body evolved to tolerate. Now, I know many times I talk to people and they say, well, how this can affect us. For me, it's an absurdity to think that it doesn't affect us. Like if our brain is electric, our heart is electric, our nervous system is electric, our cells communicate electrically. How radiation that is 1 trillion times higher than what our system is evolved to tolerate would not affect us. So what happened after we commercialized cell phones? So in 2007 and then in 2012, a bioinitiative report was published. The bioinitiative report is the most extensive review of the new science of the harms of electromagnetic fields and radiation. So it was written by the 30 leading scientists and public health professionals on this issue. And they reviewed 1,800 studies that have to do with the effects of wireless technology radiation on our body. In their conclusion, they write, bioeffects from Wi-Fi, cell phone, cell towers can occur within minutes of exposure. So every and each one of us is affected by this radiation, whether you feel it like me or not. This affects our body in numerous ways. Now, there's a lot of ways in which this radiation affects us, and I want to focus on one of them. So, about 100 years ago, scientists injected dye in the body into the blood circulation of mice. And they wanted to see what happened. And they killed the mice, and the body of the mice became blue, except the brain and the spine. So the scientists concluded that there's some kind of a mechanism in our body that protects the brain. And they called it the blood-brain barrier. So it makes sure that toxins would not go into our brain. In 1975, there was a scientist that was working for the Navy. His name is Dr. Alan Fry. At the time, again, we were in the time of the Cold War, and the Russians were doing pretty well. And our government wanted to encourage scientists to come up with good inventions and discover it. And they gave a lot of money to scientists. Alan Fry was one of those scientists that got a lot of money. And his first study on this topic was about the effects on our hearing. So a friend of his came to him and said, listen, those soldiers on the bases, in the radar bases, complain that they hear the radars. He said that's impossible. Nevertheless, he went with his friend to the base, and actually he was hearing those frequencies, those radar as well. So what he did, he made a hat from metal, and when he put that, he didn't hear the radiation. And he did it from metal because, again, metal blocks radiation. So he concluded, yes, people can hear those frequencies, and it's actually called the Frey effect. That intrigued his curiosity, and his next study was the same study, the same thing that those scientists did about 100 years ago. He injected dye into the body of mice, into their blood circulation, and he killed them and wanted to see what. Before he killed, he exposed them to microwave radiation, and then he killed them. When he opened the body, guess what happened? Yes, the whole body became blue, but the dye also got to the brain. So the conclusion was that microwave radiation actually can break the blood-brain barrier. Now that study was repeated about 40 times. We have about 40 studies that show again and again that microwave radiation can actually break the blood-brain barrier. Now, not only we have those studies, this was actually used. We used microwave radiation to break the blood-brain barrier. So there's a neurosurgeon in Sweden. His name is Dr. Leigh Salford. And when he treats people with brain tumors. Now, after you remove the tumor, many times the patients are getting chemotherapy. Now, chemotherapy would not get to their brain because of the blood-brain barrier. So if you want to treat them with chemotherapy, you have to break the blood-brain barrier to get this chemotherapy to the brain. It's not good, but it's the lesser of evils. So Dr. Salford remembered reading Dr. Frey's paper, and he went to his lab to learn how to break the blood-brain barrier using microwave radiation. And he went back to his clinic in Sweden and actually started using non-thermal level of microwave radiation, just like radiation emitted from our wireless devices, to break the blood-brain barrier of his patients to get chemotherapy to their brain. So then he was asking himself, well, what does it mean about our cell phone? If I can break their blood-brain barrier, can cell phone break their blood-brain barrier? And he started a series of studies to learn the effect of cell phones and wireless technology devices on our brain. And as I said, in one of his studies, he repeated Frey's study, and here is what he found in the brain. So this is the brain on the left, the brain before it was exposed to this radiation, and this is after the brain was exposed to radiation. All of those red spots you see, this is proteins that get into the brain that should not be there. Now, I think that is sufficient evidence to prove that this radiation can actually break our blood-brain barrier, but there's more evidence. So there's a professor in France, his name is Professor Dominique Belpont, and he's actually a cancer expert. But he noticed that a lot of people are probably the most widespread manifestation of the health effects from this radiation is microwave sickness or electrosensitivity, which is the condition I'm suffering from. You probably would not be surprised to learn that the wireless industry really doesn't want anyone to know about it or believe that it's caused from radiation. So they're starting a really cruel campaign to suggest that this is a psychological condition and fund ridiculous studies that show allegedly that people with this condition cannot detect radiation. So he decided he wants to do a study that shows that these people actually suffer from physiological injuries caused by this radiation. He tested about 700 people who suffer from microwave sickness or electrosensitivity. And he conducted a lot of various tests. And when they had a finding, one of the things he found that about 30% of them had a broken blood-brain barrier. So I think that is an example of evidence which is quite conclusive as to the harms. Now, another thing that the industry likes to say is that there is no mechanism by which this radiation can harm us, except thermal effects. And another thing that they like to say is that the overwhelming majority of studies show that there's no effect. So number one, it doesn't matter what the majority of studies show. The majority of studies does not really exist in science. And sometimes all you need is one study that can disprove all of this. So while our government did not fund studies, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, there are two studies that it did fund. One of them is a study that was done by the NIH, by the National Institute of Health. That was done by Dr. Nora Volkow, who is the head of their addiction department. And I think she got funding just because they thought she's doing a study on addictions, not on the effects of microradiation. And her study was pretty simple. She took 47 people, and she took brain scans while they're using the cell phone and wanted to see what happens in the brain. Now, industry, no matter what study you're going to do, they're going to find something not okay with that study or find study that will show that it's not true, but, they'll manipulate the study. And so, this is not an animal study, so they cannot say, oh, it's an animal study, it may not apply to humans. This is also brain scan, so the evidence is pretty clear. So she put those 47 people under brain scan, and while they're using the cell phone, and this is what happened. Okay. So this is the brain before they use a cell phone. This is the brain after they use a cell phone. You can see that when they use a cell phone, the cell phone on its own, you can see much more yellow, orange, and red. And that orange, yellow, and red represent the increase in glucose metabolism in the brain. Glucose is the food of the brain. Increase in glucose metabolism means, in a simplistic way, that the brain works harder. So what this shows, this doesn't show that there are health effects or adverse health effects. This shows that we have bioeffect, that there's clearly effect on the brain. So currently, our alleged safety guidelines claim that there are no bioeffect, but that is a proof of bioeffects. And those of us who are following the litigation, they know that until now, the industry was saying, well, there are no evidence of bioeffects. Now they're saying that there's no evidence of health effects. So, as I said, sometimes all you have to have is one study that is proof everything, 10,000 studies. But the reality is that actually the majority of studies do show effects. Now, I'm sure the industry did not count all the studies, and me neither, but some scientists did count various areas of studies on this technology, and all of those counting show that actually the majority of the studies show effects. One such area is the area of oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is a mechanism that can lead to cancer, non-cancer, and DNA damage. So while the industry said that the overwhelming majority of studies show no effect and there is no mechanism by which this radiation can harm us, in terms of oxidative stress, there are about 200 studies that were done whether or not this radiation can cause oxidative stress. 180 of them show, yes, this radiation causes oxidative stress. That's 90% of the studies. And it's a mechanism, proven mechanism. It's not the only mechanism. There are other mechanisms, and actually in the state of Oregon, there is a very known scientist on this issue. His name is Dr. Martin Pfau, and he suggested another mechanism, the VGCC mechanism. So there are likely many other mechanisms, because this radiation affects numerous systems in our body. Now, I mentioned before that our government did not fund any studies. So what happened with the government? So unfortunately, our government is just as much part of this fraud as the wireless industry. And in 1971, the government started the EPA. And the EPA was entrusted with regulating the radiation levels in our environment. In 1971, they opened a lab to learn the effects of microwave radiation. And that lab worked from 1971 to 1986. And the studies I know of that came out of that lab show that this radiation, so microwave radiation in non-thermal levels, actually have profound effects on our body. In 1986, one day, they got an order, closed the lab, you cannot study any more microwave radiation. Now, in 1984, we commercialized cell phone. In 1986, the EPA get an order to stop learning this topic. Do you think it's accidental? I doubt it. And not just that, since then, our government, as I said, did not fund any studies on this issue, except 2 studies. So what was that second study? The second study is called the NTP study, National Toxicology Program. So in 1993, the first lawsuits on brain tumors from cell phone was submitted. At the time, we were just 10 years into using cell phones, and the wireless industry the public was still not trusting that cell phones are not harmful. And when that lawsuit was submitted, immediately the share price of the wireless industry dropped. The wireless industry immediately got into alarm and decided to come out with a statement that they're now going to put $25 million to learn the effects of this radiation. Now, you're probably not going to be surprised that the person that they chose to head that worked before that for the tobacco industry and the chemical industry to show that dioxins do not cause any effect. So nothing really came out of that study, of that series of studies or whatever. We never saw the studies. So eventually, in 1999, the government decided, you know what, the FDA announced, we will conduct a study that will give us final answer as to whether or not this radiation and cell phones and wireless radiations are harmful. So they gave $25 million to the National Toxicology Program, which is part of the NIEHS, which is National Institute of Environmental Health Studies. They were supposed to give us that final answer. They were supposed to design that study that would be bulletproof, that we would not be able to doubt the results. So they worked on that study for 14 years. They made sure everything is perfect. They built these huge chambers. And 14 years later, they had the results, but we didn't hear about it until 2016, when someone on our side, his name is Dr. Louis Lassin, and he's from, his website is microwavenews.com, and he's been following this issue for 35 years.
What was that website?
Microwave News. And he has a PhD from the MIT in, if I'm not mistaken, in public science, environmental health sciences, I think. He has a master in physics and chemistry from Columbia University, quite a smart guy. And so he submitted a Freedom of Information Act request because he's following this for a while. I know that study started sometime in 1999. And yes, they had the results. So he wrote an article, and in the article he interviewed Dr. Ron Melnick, who used to head the NTP project until he retired. And Dr. Melnick said, while our hypothesis was that this radiation cannot cause cancer, our hypothesis was proven wrong. We definitely found carcinogenic effects. Furthermore, he said, this study proved that our assumption that non-ionizing radiation cannot break the DNA is false. We definitely showed DNA damage. Now, immediately the scientists had to have a press conference, and the scientists said that the public must be warned. Do you remember being warned?
No.
Yeah, not surprising, right? So not only we were not warned, the wireless industry started a spin campaign about the study, and then we had to wait another year and a half to get the actual before final report of the NTP on this result. And that final report came out in February 2018, a few months ago. And guess what happened a year and a half later? Suddenly, the NTP downplayed their own study, and suddenly that clear evidence is not so clear anymore. Lucky for us, before that, guess what happened 3 weeks before? 3 weeks before, they actually brought someone from the pharmaceutical industry to head the NTP and the project, and they demoted that person who actually led the project for all these years, Dr. Booker. Not surprising either. So, luckily for us, the NIEHS, every scientific study, before it's being published, it has to be peer-reviewed, meaning that you have to have scientists who had nothing to do with the studies review the analysis of the scientists who conducted the study to make sure the analysis is correct. So the NIEHS appointed an 11-expert panel to review the evidence on cancer, the results on cancer. And they had a hearing between March 26 to March 28. And on March 28, they came out with their conclusion: clear evidence of cancer. So they actually accepted or thought that that analysis from 2016 was the correct one, not the one from 2018. So I would expect that kind of should have huge headlines in our media. that there is clear evidence that cell phones and wireless devices are causing cancer and DNA damage. Again, media is quiet. Except on March 29, an article was published by The Nation magazine, and we have it here. The magazine. This is from March 29, 2018. And it was written by two of our leading investigative journalists. Just a moment, and here it is. How Big Wireless Made Us Think That Cell Phones Are Safe. Disinformation campaign revealed 5G rollout to expose everyone to massively increasing radiation. So that article actually discusses some of the fraud done by the wireless industry, just like the tobacco industry fraud. So now essentially we have our government study that was supposed to be that bulletproof study proving that this is harmful. But guess what happened in the end of the meeting? The FDA guy left the meeting saying, well, that's not going to change anything. So how this happened? How is it that the government has been basically misleading us and defrauding us just like the wireless industry? So what happened was, as I said, in 1993, the first lawsuit came to happen, and the wireless industry got really concerned. And the reason the wireless industry got very concerned is because the wireless industry is not insured. While we did not learn from what happened with tobacco industry, with the asbestos industry, one industry did learn, and that is the insurance industry. They almost went bankrupt because of what happened with tobacco and asbestos, and they decided not to insure the wireless industry. So what happened with insurance, you have the insurance companies, and then you have secondary insurance companies. So the insurance companies that insure the insurance companies. So if the insurance companies cannot cover the lawsuits, the secondary insurance company will cover the losses. And the two biggest secondary insurance companies in the world are the British Lloyd's and the Swiss Re. And they gave an order or suggested to the insurance company not to insure the wireless industry. So therefore, the wireless industry had to find a way to make sure it cannot be sued. And they found a way. So as I said before, the EPA was responsible to regulate this topic. And the FDA was the radiation in the environment, and the FDA was responsible to regulate the devices. So every time the EPA tried to regulate this issue, the EPA was quiet down. So the EPA was not able to suggest regulation. In 1993, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which is a spectrum auctioning agency, not a health agency, suggested a rulemaking to adopt guidelines of the IEEE. Now, IEEE is Engineer Association. And engineers may know how to measure radiation when it's coming through that window, when it's passing through a wall. They do not know how to measure radiation when it's going through a human body. Nevertheless, they wanted to adopt the IEEE regulation, which, not surprising, say there are no effects except thermal effects. Sorry,
What regulation?
The safety regulations on the effects of microwave radiation. So they suggested to adopt the IEEE, the Engineer Association regulations, and all our health agencies objected to this regulation. The health agency wrote letters to the FCC saying, how come you're adopting regulations when no biomedical person was sitting on the panel that examined the science? How come you're adopting these regulations when actually there are a lot of science proving that there are non-thermal effects, that there are long-term effects from exposure to non-thermal levels of this radiation? But the FCC ignored that. But it still did not have the power to regulate. So what the wireless industry did, the wireless industry lobbied to transfer the power to regulate the health effect, the safety guidelines for the health effects of microwave radiation to the FCC, to a spectrum auctioning agency that still does not have even one health person on its staff. So in 1996, our Congress passed Section 704 of the Telecommunication Act that gave the power to regulate this issue to the FCC. So what FCC did, yes, they did adopt the IEEE guidelines that said that there's no evidence of non-thermal effects. Although, as we said before, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of studies proving conclusively that there are effects. Now, since 1996, the FCC did not review its guidelines. They're still the same guidelines. In 2012, the GAO, the General Accountability Office of our Congress, actually gave order to the FCC to review those guidelines. So in 2013, they opened a docket. There were over 900 comments by doctors, scientists, and people who got sick, saying that those guidelines are insufficient. We are now in 2018. The FCC still did not conclude its investigation, and we have still those irrelevant guidelines, even now with the NTP study. Now, so why is it that the industry wanted that the FCC will regulate this issue? Because essentially, the wireless industry is controlling the FCC. There is a 2015 report by Harvard University Law School, their ethics center, called Captured Agency, how the wireless industry is being controlled by the same industries it's supposed to regulate. Examples: Tom Wheeler, the previous chairman of the FCC, was the head of the CTIA, the Wireless Industry Lobby Association, for 14 years. He's the guy who announced $25 million going to go into research. And we would not be surprised to know that he was actually the one appointed by the Obama administration, although Obama, I don't know if you remember, said there won't be any lobbyists in my administration. So he took the biggest lobbyist for the wireless industry and made him the head of the FCC. Now, Tom Wheeler also raised $700,000 for Obama. The current head of the FCC, that is Ajit Pai. Ajit Pai is a Verizon attorney. And now the Republican administration had to appoint a commissioner. We have, in the FCC, you have a chairman and 5 commissioners. So the Republican administration had to appoint another commissioner. And that's a really nice one. His name is Brendan Carr. Now, if you go to the FCC website and read about Brendan Carr, you think that he's the perfect public servant. And, but he gave a testimony to the Senate, and he said, my spark for public service started when I was clerking for an appellate court judge. And then in his bio, he writes that he actually had a First Amendment right experience when it comes to telecommunications. So that sounds like the perfect person who's going to protect our constitutional rights. Well, not exactly. So the experience that Brendan Carr has from First Amendment rights in regard to telecommunication is, well, in 2012, the city of San Francisco passed an ordinance. They actually wanted to warn the residents from potential So in 2012, the city of San Francisco passed an ordinance that wanted to warn the residents of San Francisco from potential effects of cell phones. They wanted to put a warning in the point of sale everywhere they're selling cell phones. And guess what happened? The wireless industry, the CTIA, sued the city of San Francisco. After 2 years, eventually the city of San Francisco decided to withdraw its ordinance because it said that if it's going to lose in court, it will not be able to cover the legal fees of the wireless industry. That is what is called legal terrorism. And so guess who was the attorney for the wireless industry? No, Brendan Carr. Oh. Brendan Carr, that is his First Amendment constitutional right experience, because they claim that warning will violate the wireless industry First Amendment right of free speech. So that's his experience. So, and one of the previous commissioner of the FCC, she is now the head of the CTIA. So this is how our rights are being taken away. And this is just a really, really small part of all of this fraud, but that kind of like give you a picture of what is going on. If you want some more information, Well, in the past year and a half, I've been trying to find a way to create a breakthrough with this topic. So I started with Congress. I said, well, if the industry is there every day, trying to influence our legislators, we should be there every day too. But then I learned that after trying and not getting anywhere, the wireless industry put in Congress last year over $120 million in lobbying money. And there are 563 lobbyists registered for the wireless industry in Congress. We don't have any lobbyists on our side. And the same thing going on a state level. We tried to pitch this to attorney generals. They're also funded by the wireless industry. So there are really very little we can do in terms of affecting this, affecting change, influencing our legislator, trying to have protective legislation. Now, I started this before saying that I want to show you that actually all of those thousands and thousands of studies actually manifested in the terms of human evidence. So do we have the human evidence? So microwave sickness, which is the condition I'm suffering from, it's probably the most immediate widespread manifestations of the harms of this technology. Surveys that were done up to 2006 show that at least 10% of the population already have symptoms. And let's think, 2006, that is before smartphones, that is before Wi-Fi, that is before the wireless utility meters on our house. That is essentially before the exponential increase of our exposure to this radiation. I can tell you from my experience, I've been working on this, as I said, I've been involved with it since 2009, and I've been working on it since 2012. Definitely, with every day that's passing, I get more and more people approaching me, reporting symptoms. If you go on Facebook, you see more and more groups of people who are suffering from this. And what I didn't mention before is, when I got really sick and I moved to the Catskills, shortly after, my sister told me that they're going to put Wi-Fi in the schools of my nieces in Israel. And I literally could not sleep thinking that my nieces and other children might become sick from this radiation. And I had no doubt that they will. Because while we are sensitive, all of us are sensitive to this radiation, children are much more sensitive to this radiation. Their head is smaller, their skull is thinner, their cells multiply in speed which is double that of adults, which means that this high speed of cell multiplication can lead to cancer, to more mutations that lead to cancer. Their nervous system is still developing, so they have much higher sensitivity to this radiation. And so as a result of what my sister told me, I decided to fight the government and try to block the installations of Wi-Fi in the schools. And in August 2012, I submitted a lawsuit in the Supreme Court in Israel to ban the use of Wi-Fi in schools and replace them with wired networks. What happened in the case was, unfortunately, by the time we submitted the lawsuit, there were already some schools that had Wi-Fi for a couple of years, and we exposed an epidemic of sickness among the children in the schools. We had over 200 sick children, and that was just in 6 schools that we checked. And for each of these children, we could correlate, and we did correlate the symptoms to the exposure either to Wi-Fi in the school, or to a nearby cell tower, or to both. And the most common symptoms we saw in the schools were headaches, nausea, nosebleeds. Actually, in a lot of schools in the US, the teachers now have a special sign about when children have nosebleeds, so the children can go in and take care of themselves. Cognitive problems and exhaustion. Now let's talk about exhaustion. When I was a kid, I would come back from school, I would throw my bag, take my bag, and play 8 hours basketball. Now children are exhausted. Why should they be exhausted? Let's talk about cognitive problems. So I remember for myself, when I started being exposed to Wi-Fi, my brain was just not functioning. The same thing happened to these children. I cannot tell you how many parents told me that the teachers of their children called them saying, I don't know what's going on with your child. He or she cannot follow up what's going on in the class. I remember especially this story about I was contacted by a mother in Israel who is also a teacher. And before her daughter started first grade, she was actually found to be advanced to her age. One day, that girl's come back home and she tells her mother, I'm stupid. And the mother asked, why are you stupid? She said, I cannot understand what the teacher is saying in the class. And she also told her mother that she feels as if ants are going on her head, walking on her head. That's like the tingling feeling a lot of us getting from this radiation. And there are numerous stories. A lot of the children get heart palpitations. I met with a child in LA, Justin. He's a 12-year-old, and the way he described it to me, he said, every time I'm with Wi-Fi, I feel that my heart is going to explode like a volcano. And again, children are more affected, and there are a lot of children who are sick, including in the state of Oregon. Unfortunately, a lot of these children are being misdiagnosed, for example, with ADHD. ADHD is also correlated to this radiation. The rates of ADHD in the past 10 years more than doubled. There is a study that was done by Professor Hugh Tyler from Yale University. He took mice and exposed them to this radiation when the mice was pregnant. When the baby mice were born, they actually had a little bit of different brain, and they manifested the same behavior that people, adults and children with ADHD manifest. Recently, a paper came out, which is a summary of 5 studies showing that women that were exposed to more radiation while pregnant had higher rates of children with behavioral and attention problems. Let's talk about another condition, autism. The rates of autism tripled in the past 10 years, from 150 to 1 in 59 children. There's a professor in Harvard University, her name is Professor Martha Herbert, and she's an MD, PhD, pediatric neurologist, and one of the world's leading experts on autism. In 2013, she wanted to check whether there's a possible correlation between the exponential increase in our exposure to wireless radiation to the increase in autism. And she thought she was going to end up writing a very short paper with some references. She ended up writing a 60-page paper with 550 references. Now, her conclusion, yes, a correlation is possible. And there was not one study that showed that this radiation is causing autism. But there were a lot of studies showing what this radiation, what happens in the brain of people, adults and children with autism. And there were a lot of studies that showing what this radiation, the effects on our brain. And she found a lot of correlation, a lot of possible mechanism and effects that can lead from exposure to radiation to autism. There's some doctors now that are telling parents of children with autism to remove the wireless from their homes, and the children actually getting better. 2 weeks ago, I went to a Facebook page, it's called EMF and Autism, and there was a picture there of a child writing on a wall, and I read that post, and it was from a mother. And she writes that since her autistic child was born, he was not willing to touch a pen. They remove all the wires from the house, and the progress is amazing, and her son now doesn't stop writing. And then she concludes, she said, progress is amazing. And she actually sent me an email with all the various changes in her son, and I and everyone who read it actually had tears in our eyes. So this is autism. Cancer. So the glioblastoma. So John McCain's tumor, I don't know if you saw the scar. I think if you see the scar, that gives you all the answer what was causing it. That is a cancer that is 100% associated with cell phone use. And actually, there are courts that already found that it's caused by cell phone use. Beau Biden, John Biden's son, died from glioblastoma. Ted Kennedy died from glioblastoma. LeBron James had a salivary gland tumor. Why would a young, healthy sports person would get a salivary gland tumor here? And it was removed, and you never heard about it because immediately after, the wireless industry, actually Samsung, paid him many million dollars to become their spokesperson. Acoustic neuroma, that's a tumor in the ear. So the NTP studies, the type of tumor they found are called schwannomas. Schwannomas are tumors that not developing in the organ. They found schwannomas in the heart, for example, and they're not developing in the heart, they're developing on the nerves surrounding the heart. Acoustic neuroma, this is another type of schwannoma just on the nerve of the ear. And again, there's a court decision in Italy saying that a wireless industry employee got acoustic neuroma from their cell phone. The four top diseases that kills children and young adults now are brain tumors, thyroid cancer, testis cancer, rectal cancer. Everywhere people hold or use their cell phones. Breast cancers. There's a lot of reports of women that do not have any DNA predisposition for cancer now developing breast cancer, young women. But more interesting is the spread of the tumors, which resembles the shape of the cell phone when they used to put the cell phone in a pocket. And I actually have an image for that. By the way, this is the penetration of radiation to the brain of an adult, 10-year-old and 5-year-old. You can see the difference. And as for the breast cancer, so this is how she used to hold her cell phone, and these are the tumors. So what about reproductive harm? In the past 10 to 15 years, there's a huge reduction in the quality of sperm in male. Actually, 70% of infertility is caused by problem with the sperm. I know the data from Israel because it's a little bit easier to maintain data in a small country with socialized medicine. And there's a reduction in quality of sperm between 25 to 40%, and actually worldwide it's about 25 to 30%. And there was a study that was done, for example, there are actually dozens and dozens and dozens of studies showing what this radiation is doing to the sperm. And these are really easy studies to conduct, and there's no doubt as to the results. So such a study was done in Israel. It was done in a Technion, which is the equivalent of the MIT, no offense to the MIT. And it was done on 106 men. 50% of them put a cell phone in a pocket, 50% did not put a cell phone in a pocket. Those who did not put the cell phone in a pocket had 11% bad sperm. That is normal. Those who did put the cell phone in a pocket had 47% bad sperm. That is not normal. Actually, there was an interview with the head of the sperm bank in Israel, and she said that 10 years ago, 1 in 10 men qualified to donate their sperm. Now it's 1 in 100. And now what happens? Let's say you remove the cell phone from your pocket, and we do not use the laptop close to this area. Your sperm will recuperate with a few months. However, the damage to the DNA of the sperm will not recuperate. Now, I mentioned before the NTP study. Now, the results that were found by the NTP study are not new. They found nothing new. More interestingly, they said that there was a DNA damage. Now, it's also the results when it comes to the DNA damage are also not new. Actually, we have about 50 studies that show that this radiation is causing DNA damage. And the first study was published in 1995, and it was done by Professor Henry Lai in Washington University. And he did a very good study, and the NTP study that was done now confirmed his finding. But you know what happened when Dr. Lai did his study? Motorola, we have a memo from Motorola writing that they have to war game Henry Lai's study. And Henry Lai actually was war game. He never could get more money to do more studies on microwave sickness. So there's also, as I said, evidence of DNA damage. That may explain why right now 50% of our children, according to the CDC, suffering from chronic conditions. So sick has become normal. So I think that between microwave sickness, cancers, ADHD, reproductive harm, autism, I think we're somewhere close to that 50% bar I put in the beginning. And even if it's not there, we're definitely getting there quickly. And I think there's enough evidence that this radiation is harmful. And the evidence is here, scientific and human, and evidence of fraud. Now, while all of this is pretty bad, I think you agree, it's going to get worse now. And I don't know how many of you heard about the 5G, but that the Nation magazine, as I said, mentions the 5G. So what is 5G? The word G stands for generation. 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, all of that was about connecting people. 1G was about talk, 2G was talk and text, 3G was talk and text and a little bit of data, 4G was talk, text, and a lot of data. Now, what happens is the wireless industry got to saturation in terms of its ability to make profit, because almost everyone has a cell phone. So they needed to find new ways to make profit, and that is 5G. 5G, a whole different concept. 5G is not about connecting people. 5G is about connecting things. So basically, 5G is the basis for what is known as the Internet of Things. What does it mean? It means that now every appliance and anything in our house is going to have an antenna, microwave radiation emitting antenna, transmitting nonstop. So when our ticket does not have enough water, it will send a text to our cell phone that it needs more water. So when the laundry detergent is finishing, our laundry machine will send a text to our cell phone or to the grocery store. Next time you go to the grocery store, they'll tell you need more detergent, etc., etc., etc. Worse, now they have diapers with antenna that send text to the mother whenever the baby poops. This is what Internet of Things is. So if everything in your home has an irradiating antenna, there's a lot of data to collect. And because you have so much data to collect and so many transmitting antennas, you have to have a lot more cell towers. And you also have to have frequencies that have bigger bandwidth to transfer all this data. So now, while we're still going to use microwave frequencies for this technology, some of it will be done with much, much higher frequencies in the microwave bandwidth, which are called millimeter waves. Why are they called millimeter waves? Because millimeter, M-I-L, millimeter, millimeter. So they're called millimeter waves because you have so many oscillations per second that the distance between the oscillations is very small. It's in millimeters. Now, we already have dozens and dozens of studies on millimeter waves showing that they are harmful. There's actually one such study from Israel, and it showed that when these frequencies interact with our sweat nodes, they make the whole body into a big antenna. And I suggested after this talk, you go online and you're going to Google active denial system. This is a system developed by the US Defense Forces, and you can go online to their website. And you see that they're using 95 gigahertz, which is the same group of frequency we're going to use for 5G. They're using that frequencies to send a signal to deal with people. So essentially, when they emit this frequency, when it touches people's body, they feel like it's on fire and they have to run away. Now, the intensity they're using is thermal levels. But what if that antenna is going to put outside of your house on the electric pole in the same height of your second room bedroom, directly radiating into your children's bedroom? Maybe it's not thermal levels, but do you think there won't be any effects long term? But that's what they're doing now. Because they need a lot of antennas to support all of these smart devices, essentially 5G is about putting antenna almost on every electric pole, every light fixture on our streets, and they already started doing it. And those will be low, as I said, probably in the height of your second floor bedroom, and they don't want to have any permission asked to do that. So what do? Now, almost in every state, there is a bill that basically gives them unlimited access to a public right of way. Now, until now, we could not object installations of cell towers based on health effect. Now, remember that Section 704 of the Telecommunication Act? So Section 704 took the rights from the health agencies to regulate this issue and gave it to the FCC. Another thing that Section 704 did was to basically ban states from regulating health effects when it comes to the locations of cell towers, and ban you from mentioning the issue of health and environmental issues in the discussions of the locations of cell towers. So what does it mean in reality? In reality, it means that when they want to put a cell tower in front of your home, and there's going to be a hearing in a city council, and you're going to go to the city council and say, hey, I just heard this lecture that there are 10,000 studies proving that this is harmful. I do not want this antenna in front of my home. They tell you, hey, stop. You cannot mention health effects. I mean, what do you mean? Section 704 says you cannot discuss environmental and health issues when it's come to the locations of cell towers. Now, that is, to me, violations of our First Amendment right of free speech. Now, let's say you did mention health. And let's say that city council voted against that antenna, even if it's not based on health effects. Nevertheless, according to Section 704, the wireless industry can sue that city council for rejecting the application because you mentioned health, and that may have affected their judgment. And numerous municipalities and cities across the US were sued by the wireless industry. And that is another violation of our First Amendment right of free speech. That's not only preventing speech, it's also punishing speech. Now, they put that cell tower in front of your home and now you got sick. So you want to sue for the damage that was caused to you? Well, you cannot. So there's a Third Circuit Appellate Court decision that said, if you will be allowed to sue for the damage that was caused to you, that is going to create a conflict with the purpose of Section 704. That is called conflict preemption. So now you cannot sue for the damage that was caused to you. And there are right now in court 29 brain tumor cases that were submitted, brain tumors from cell phones, and they wanted to make it into a class action. And the court ruled you can submit a lawsuit for your brain tumor from your cell phone only if you got sick up to 1996. So essentially, we do not have redress under federal law. We do not have redress under state law. So that is a violation of our Fifth Amendment right to due process. So, as I said, we cannot object to installations of 5G antenna based on health effects. But now, with this legislation that they're introducing, we would not be able to object it based on any grounds. Now, why do they have to do this? First, as I said before, they're not insured by the insurance company are not insuring them, so they cannot have lawsuits. Second, this is a very, very expensive infrastructure. You can imagine that if you have to put an antenna almost on every pole, this is a very expensive infrastructure. So they've been lying to us on this as well. To the Congress, they say, well, this is about rural areas that were being wireless to rural area. So we just had a hearing in Michigan, and they admitted that that was not true. Because this is very intense infrastructure, it's too costly for our rural areas. Then they said it's about autonomous cars. Well, that's not about autonomous cars, because we had an engineer working for the car industry saying that this has nothing to do with 5G, and they actually already have autonomous cars working without 5G. Then they're telling the people, they're writing emails to people whenever there's a bill in a state. For example, we had a bill in the state of Maryland, and they knew we were going to act to stop it. So they sent text or email to all their clients in the state of Maryland, please contact your representative and tell them that you want 5G because that's going to reduce your download speeds from 8 seconds to 4 seconds. People actually do that. So do you think that reducing your download speeds from 8 seconds to 4 seconds is going to pay for $200 to $300 billion a year infrastructure? No, it will not. So what will pay for that? What's going to pay for that really is your data. So all of this technology is about collecting your data. They collect the data emitted from all your appliances as to whatever it is that you do and then going to sell it. And according to McKinsey, which is one of the leading consultancy firms in the world, they have a report from 2015 saying that your data is about $4 to $11 trillion industry per year. That's what's paying for that infrastructure. So if until now you are buying wireless products, essentially right now you are becoming the product. They want your information, and that's what's going to pay for that. And for that, they're going to have this legislation that gives them unlimited access to the public rights of way, and our legislators actually voting in favor, without even knowing what's 5Gs, what's microwaves, or anything. So this is really why we're doing those lectures. We are trying to awaken communities. Our rights are being crashed and violated on every level. Our Congress does not protect us. Our state legislators do not protect us. The FCC is corrupt. The wireless industry has been defrauding us. And unless we wake up, not only we are sick, our children are sick, and we're going to have the cell tower in front of our home. And they're already installing those cell towers. People going to work and they come back and there's a cell tower in front of their home. People going to sleep and they wake up and there's a cell tower in front of the home. And unless people will wake up, they're going to wake up with a cell tower in front of their homes. And actually, a bill did pass in Oregon, and which is not an active bill, it's just a bill saying that we should support all these portable wireless broadbands being put anywhere and everywhere. So, sorry, it was in March 2018. I don't think that that's the last bill. They're probably going to bring a bill sometime soon. I don't think this is the end of it. But I think people need to wake up and start doing something. And yesterday I was in Ashland, and they started a new organization. It's going to be called Oregon for Safer Tech. And I do hope that the activists here, the activists in Portland, and activists in Ashland will join together and start fight these bills. And I think that really the last chance we have in terms of doing something is on the municipal and state level, because that is where we have the most influence. So I hope that as a result, we ask people first to give their emails so we can send you a follow-up to this presentation. You can see with links to all the various studies I mentioned and other sources. And also we will share this information with the Oregon for Safer Tech, and so they will be contacting you if you want to work with them and help them.
And also Family for the Safe Meals.
Yes, okay, thank you, Kathy. So this is about this part of the lecture. I'm going to, I know that I was, in those flyers you were promised advice on how to get safer with this technology, which is going to be what I'm going to talk next. So what can we do? The first thing I recommend people to do is actually to turn off the Wi-Fi in their home. Now, one issue I did not discuss technically is something called modulation. So modulation seems to be a very active part of the creations of health effects of this technology. So what is modulation? Modulation is if you want to move houses and you get a pickup truck, your pickup truck carries your stuff from point A to point B. Then there are different ways in which you can arrange the boxes in the back of your pickup truck, right? That would be the same as modulation. You can modulate the boxes in different ways. Same thing with wireless technology. You have the carrier wave. That's the wave that carries your talk or your text or your movie from point A to point B. But there are different ways in which you can arrange the actual text or the voice on that carrier wave, and that will be called the modulation. Studies that were done, first of all, that study from 1975 by Alan Fry showing that this radiation can break the blood-brain barrier also showed that most of the health effects are happening because of the modulation, not because of the carrier wave. The EPA studies from 1971 to 1986 showed the same thing. Now, the wireless industry also knows that. So what does the wireless industry do? The wireless industry, in the study that it's conducted, is actually removing the modulation. So some of the studies show effects, some of the studies show no effects, but all the studies that were done with the actual modulation of the wireless technology show effect. Now, why am I talking about all of this? Because it seems that the modulation of the Wi-Fi is a little bit more bioactive than the rest of the wireless devices. And I know because I felt it for myself, and I know because a lot of other people feel it, and I know because tests also show it. And one of the things that is a problem with this, with the Wi-Fi is, there's some fluorescent lights. Fluorescent lights have flickering, it's basically flickering light. And anything that is flickering is more difficult for our nervous system. Same going on with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi uses 2.45 gigahertz as a main frequency, but it also uses a lot of other frequencies. So it's keep on jumping between frequencies, and anything that is like flickering or not constant is more difficult for our nervous system. But there is another explanation to that, and that was given to me by Dr. or Professor von Klitzing in Germany. His brother won the Nobel Prize in Physics. He's a biophysicist, and he tested about 100 people with electrosensitivity. And what he saw was that people were reacting to the Wi-Fi more severely, although the levels of radiation were lower 50 or more times than those emitted by cell phones or cordless phones. So he concluded that there's something in the Wi-Fi modulation that is more difficult for the body to tolerate. His explanation was something called the beacon frequency. The beacon frequency, if you have an airport, it sends a frequency to the planes to come to the airport. Basically, it says, the airport is here, come over here. Same thing happening with the Wi-Fi. So when you open your smartphone or your laptop, it shows you that there are 50 or 20 Wi-Fi networks near you. How does your cell phone know that? Because the router sends a beacon frequency saying, I'm here, do you need me? Most routers, the beacon frequency is 10 hertz. Our alpha brainwaves work on frequencies which are between 8 to 13 hertz. And one of the first things you learn in electronic courses would be if you have two antennas transmitting on the same frequency, there are going to be disturbances. That may explain why we have cognitive problems, sleep disturbances, exhaustions, etc., when we are in an environment with wireless. Now, another thing that the Wi-Fi does is also interfere with the production of melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone release that starts all the corrective processes in our body, to correct bad things that happen to our body from various environmental exposures during the day. And that study that was done by Professor Henry Lai in Washington University in 1995 that showed that this radiation breaks the DNA had a second part. And that part was about the melatonin. So part of his experiment, he gave melatonin to the mice the night before he exposed them to radiation. When he gave them melatonin, there was actually no DNA damage. But as I said, there are studies that show that this radiation, the wireless radiation, affects the melatonin production. And so you want to turn off that wireless router at least at night so you can get good sleep, so you can have enough melatonin so your body can fix itself after all this exposure to this radiation from the day. So that would be the first thing I do. The second thing I'll do is actually to turn off the Wi-Fi at all times and use Ethernet, wired connection to the internet. I'm using internet all the time. Wi-Fi does not mean internet. A lot of the people think that Wi-Fi means internet. Wi-Fi is wireless connection to the internet. Internet is the body of data that we can access. And we can access it wirelessly or we can access it with an Ethernet cable. And our routers have two options. They emit the internet wirelessly, but you can also connect a cable to the back of the router, and this way you connect to the Ethernet with a wire. And when you do that, you want to disable the Wi-Fi in your router and disable the Wi-Fi in your personal device. Because even if you connect it with a cable and the router continues to radiate and your laptop continues to emit Wi-Fi, you're still getting that radiation. And you can just go online. There's a lot of websites that explain how to disable the wireless in your router and in your personal devices, including videos on YouTube. Now, another thing to do is get rid of your cordless phones if you have. Cordless phone is like having a cell tower in your home. You have the base station that constantly transmits microwave radiation to all the other units. Now, until, 10, 15 years, those cordless phones were radiating only when you made a call or get a call. But then they came out with DECT phones. DECT phones means 24/7 radiation. Put those cell phones and put those cordless phones in the garbage. Get a regular corded phone, and if you want to use a phone without anything in your hand, just put it on speaker. It works great. Now let's talk about your smartphone or cell phone. So most of the radiation from your smartphones is because you have applications, and those applications keep on sending signal to the cell tower to see if there are any updates. Now, in terms of numbers, that would be about 1 to 1,000 milliwatt per square meter all the time. Now, if you go to your settings and disable the cellular data in your phones, you're going to still be able to make and receive calls. You're going to still be able to get and send text. What you're not going to have is that constant update of all the applications. And if you want to do that, you can just go, put it on, get all the updates, turn it off. And the radiation is going down dramatically. As I said, from something like 1 to 1,000 milliwatt per square meter, it's going down to 0.001 milliwatt per square meter. Another thing you want to do is basically disable any feature you do not use in a smartphone. Our phones have a different antenna for each of the various features in our phone. For example, there is a Bluetooth. Bluetooth is like a Wi-Fi network, but to shorter distances. So we use Bluetooth, for example, for those earpieces that some of us are wearing. And by the way, those Bluetooth earpiece, garbage too. They tell people that this is going to reduce the radiation, but seriously, people, common sense. How come if you put in your ear a microwave radiating transmitter, that now you have two transmitters? You have your cell phone transmitting, you have your Bluetooth transmitter. How is it that you're going to reduce the radiation? You're actually doubling it. Worse, you actually put it here in that part that you don't have a skull where the radiation goes directly to your brain. And actually, by the way, when I see people wearing that, I really cannot resist and I have to talk to them. So I go to them and ask them, do you have an extra $700,000? I say, no. I say, well, because that's what your brain tumor is going to cost you. So,
Yeah.
and by the way, that lack of common sense happened with that as well. So one day I go to a bank in Israel, and I see a guy with that Bluetooth in his ear. I said, that's not a good idea. In Israel, it doesn't cost $700,000. Anyway, so I said, that's not a good idea. And he said, why? I said, well, I explained to him. He said, really interesting, because I just had an operation in my ear because I had this intense pains in my ears. But the interesting thing is the pain didn't stop.
Right.
It continues, and it happened in that year that I put the Bluetooth in. I said, okay, duh. So, anyway, it's really funny when you encounter those things on a daily basis. Back to Bluetooth. So basically that is a Bluetooth. So that goes to the garbage. And you can go to your setting and disable the Bluetooth. You can also disable the Wi-Fi. You disable any feature that you do not use, because if you do not disable it, this is another antenna emitting more radiation. Wearable devices. Anyone here has an iWatch or Fitbit? Good.
Right.
But you know what I would tell you, right? Garbage. So I go to this shoe store, to DSW, because I buy not only gadgets, I buy shoes sometimes. So I see this very nice cashier, and she had this iWatch on her hand, and I said, well, that might not be a good idea. And she asked, why? I said, well, I explained her that I got sick from it. She asked, what symptoms do you have? Now, by now, I know if something is wrong just by the way a person asks me, what symptoms do you have? So I explained, I have this and this symptoms. She said, do you have any heart problems? I said, okay, what's going on? She said, well, it's really interesting that iWatch supposed to track my heart condition, my heart pulse, beats, etc. But since I got that iWatch, it tells me that I have a problem, but the problem started when I had the watch. I mean, it's so all of those devices should not be worn. And I don't know if you noticed, if you heard about it, but Fitbit had to actually recall the Fitbits because people are getting all these rashes and other symptoms. And by the way, rashes, various skin problems, also one of the manifestations of problem from wireless radiation. I don't know, I guess in Colorado, probably a lot of people live in rural areas where no cell phone reception. So many times the wireless companies come, and in order for you to have internet, they put booster antennas in your homes. Now, many people do that because otherwise they cannot access the internet. That is not the right way to do it. Those boosters are actually cell towers in your home. So if you have friends, tell them that's not how to do it. It's better to have satellites, because satellites are essentially a concentrated beam going towards the satellites. Some radiation is coming out from the sides of the satellite dish, but if you keep that dish about 30 feet away from your home, you would not have any radiation from your home. You put a cable from that satellite dish to your home, and then the rest is the same. You have a router, and you use wired internet, right? So essentially, from now on, your slogan should be wired, wired, wired. Wired headphones, wired internet, and if any appliance in the store says smart, that means dumb. Okay? It's really dumb to buy smart appliances.
Except the dental floss.
Sorry?
Except the dental floss.
You say so. By the way, all of those amalgam fillings, not good either. It's like an antenna inside your mouth. So if you can get rid of them, I personally got rid of them. It didn't affect anything, but I know some people that once they remove their amalgam, feelings, a lot of the symptoms disappeared. So I don't know, when it comes to wiring, if you have a wireless keyboard or wireless mouse, very bad, especially the wireless mouse. They emit very intense radiation and you put your hand on it non-stop. Wired, 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 wired. So this is the end, and thank you for bearing with me for so long. There's a lot of really good websites. You know, there's a sentence that we are the most informed society that has ever died of ignorance. If you go, and it was said by Ruben Blades, who is a musician and a social activist. So if you go online, there's so many websites. I don't know if there's one. Well, the one website with a lot of information will be Environmental Health Trust. They have a lot of information on a lot of issues. I have a bit of issue with their message. Oh, just keep the router a little bit farther away and blah blah, which they know it's not honest. They like to downplay the message, but again, they have a good amount of information in it. The website I recommend the most in terms of following the science, that would be Safer EMR. That is a website by Dr. Joel Moskovich from Berkeley, and he is really doing magnificent work. Another website would be Microwave News, which I mentioned before. He's doing a lot of good. Yes, Safer EMR. As I said, we can send you those links, but Safer EMR. EMR stands for electromagnetic radiation. The other one is microwavenews.com. My website is wearetheevidence.org, and Bo here has been instrumental in helping us doing this website. Thank you, Bo. And any other website that I didn't mention that would be important?
How about Wireless Warriors?
EMF Warriors. EMF Warriors.
And also the other one is Night, EMF Night.
Yes.
We were just in Phoenix. Phoenix has 5G. My son, by the third day there, he had every symptom you just said.
I'm sorry to hear that.
We were leaving to go to the airport. He had headache, nausea, flu-like symptoms. We got on the airplane. As soon as we landed in the Eugene Airport, in fact, even on flight, his symptoms went away.
By the way, I've been going around the U.S. and I think that so far the best state in terms of radiation that I visited is Oregon. But keep it that way. Yes, in the end.
Is there any estimate what it would cost to fiber optic cable the entire U.S.?
Well, actually, there's fiber optic cables already to a large, significant part of the U.S. But what's happening is that they do not connect it to the homes. So they get until the homes, but they don't put the final part of it. Moreover, actually, the people in the U.S. paid taxes to fund the fiber optics. Nevertheless, they're not getting it. And there's one guy who's actually trying to start a lawsuit to demand that people will get their money back. And not just that, what the wireless industry is doing now, instead of giving you that fiber optic, they say, well, we're going to use it. The way they're going to use it, they say, well, we'll use it between our antennas. So they're going to utilize it to make profit out of you for their 5G that will steal your data. I don't know the exact estimation. I know that most of the infrastructure is there. They're just not connecting it.
Yeah, they're talking about $200 to $300 billion every year.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Google offered to hardwire the entire country at one time. I don't know what happened with that, but
putting satellite is more profitable.
If we can get that cost estimate and then compare it to what they're spending, I mean, we just shadow.
Just go search Google Bruce Kushnick. How is his name? David? No. Bruce.
Bruce Kushnick.
Kushnick. Sorry. Google Bruce Kushnick, and he actually wrote a book. Do you remember the name of the book?
No, it's very.
Yeah, he wrote a book about it. So promise versus reality, or something like that.
Do not opt out, because then you are creating a contract which says, I don't want an on meter, I want an off meter. But there's still digital meters and they can be turned on from their office, from UWeb's office. So what you need to say if you don't want the smart meter is, I want to keep my analog meter. I do not want a smart meter.
Can I comment on that? I think, can I comment on that?
Yes.
Guys, so in that terms, you now have the NTP, and an NTP study is a game changer. So the way to use it when it's come to smart meters, and by the way, I know people who became sick, I know more people who became sick from those wireless smart meters than from any other wireless device. Now, the NTP is government study that conclusively said that this is cancer-causing, DNA-breaking agent. They should not be allowed to put wireless-emitting radiation that is causing cancer and DNA damage on your home. If they're not allowed to put asbestos in your home, they cannot force to have those meters in your home. And how you're going to, how we utilize the NTP is going to depend on us. If we leave it up to the government, they'll find a way to downplay the impact of the NTP. The burden is on us to use it in very strict way and start using it to demand to remove the Wi-Fi from the schools, because how dare they're forcing this radiation of our children when they prove it's causing DNA damage and cancer. When we had tobacco, when they show that this is harmful, then we banned smoking in public places. They should not be allowed to have smoking wireless in the schools. Now, I want to make give you a little bit more information on this Wi-Fi in the schools. Actually, people are not aware, but our children in the state of Oregon are not insured from effects of wireless radiation. In the policy, in the insurance policy that covers the children in our schools, it says that if they're going to be harmed from wireless radiation, they are not covered. How dare them not covering our children and then forcing this radiation on them? So guys, you have the NTP study, that is a game changer, and you can use it in very positive ways. It depends on you. So when it comes to smart meters, no, proven harmful. You cannot say it's not harmful. Our government proved that it's harmful. You should not be allowed to put this on my home. Yes.
Okay. The second part of this is that Families for Safe Meters got the contract with Census, which is the company that is putting these meters on. And in that contract, it has instructions for the meter installers that if they come to your house and they want to install it, all you have to do is say, I do not want that meter on my house, and they have to leave.
Another thing when it comes to smart meters, so recently, the only state in the US that actually reviewed the issue of smart meters and whether or not they have any public benefits is the state of New Mexico. 2 years ago, their utility company submitted an application to put smart meters. A few citizen groups joined together and started objecting this, and they did it very effectively. The hearings were about 2 years. I gave an expert testimony last year in regard to the House effect, and a few months ago, the decision came, and it said there's no benefit to the public from smart meters. None. And they rejected the utility company application to put smart meters in the state of New Mexico. So this is another thing to use. Say, listen, you did not review this, they did. Here is all the evidence that all the statements made by those utility companies as to the benefits of smart meters are false. So between the New Mexico decision to the NTP decision, you have a lot to work on, a lot to work with. Sorry. Yes, ma'am.
Today on kpfa.org, the radio station in Berkeley, they have a 5G talk on your own health and fitness at 1 o'clock. Fantastic. You can go to kpfa.org at archive 1 o'clock earlier today and listen to that show with Hardscar, the guy who did the article
from the Nation. Oh,
yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So he is being interviewed on that show.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, so.
And we also gave, just before I came here, an interview to KBOO. Yes, now back to you. Thank you. And Amy Goodman also interviewed one of the writers, and she did two-part interview, which is worthwhile listening to.
And it was on NPR too, mainstream NPR. These are things.
Yeah. Ma'am, yes.
I live in the outskirts of the county of Springfield, Whale.
Okay.
And I talked to Equid like about a week and a half ago because they said they were putting smart meters, they're putting them all over Springfield, and they haven't got to us yet. I asked to opt out, no such thing as opting out, and they are going to put them in, and all I have to do is get on a list of people who would like to opt out, and then after they're all done completing everybody's smart meter, then they'll decide whether there'll be an opt-out or not, because like Eugene has a free opt-out, but Springfield is getting them right now, and.
Lawyer up, find a lawyer, and attack this, because I can assure you there are a lot of ways to attack this legally. I'm sure they didn't do right procedures. Now again, you have the NTP. They should not be allowed to put it in your house, but you need to do it effectively. Join us in a community, find a lawyer, and start fighting this. There's no way around it.
I told them I wanted to keep my meter that I have, and they said it's not going to work anymore.
You're not going to say that, and they're going to listen to you. If anything, they're very aggressive. We have people being arrested. We have people being charged with criminal indictments, and they're not going to do that just because you're going to say it. All of you guys need to come together as a community and fight this in an organized way. That's what they did in New Mexico, and that's what you should do here. And unless you do, you're going to have those smart meters on your home, and people will become sick. But as I said, the NTP is a game changer. Use it. They would not say, okay, you said so, so we're not putting it. You need to get organized and take action. Yeah.
You suggested, at the very least, to turn off your Wi-Fi at night.
Right.
Recovery sleep. But those of us who live really close in neighborhoods, there's an argument that I hear that says, oh, all those Wi-Fi signals are just as strong from 20 neighbors all around. So it doesn't matter. We're not turning off the Wi-Fi, just be quiet.
I had my house wired so that I wouldn't have to use wireless. And people come into my house with their laptops and flip them on, and they don't need the wireless.
First of all, yes, you're going to still have some signals from your neighbors, but still not having your own router is better. Radiation drops in the square of the distance, so distance is key here. You're still going to have a lot of radiation from the neighbor, but it's not the same as having your own router. And again, the more you reduce your exposure, the better you are. And then you can also go and talk to your neighbors and get them to come to lectures or watch the movie. By the way, there's a movie came out, Generation Zapped, which talks about wireless harms. People can organize screening in their communities and get their neighbors, family, and friends educated. So that is a way for you to continue and educate your neighbors to also turn off their Wi-Fi routers. So it's still not perfect, but it's better.
Yeah.
Yes, David.
Generation Zapped.
Yes, Generation Zapped. Yeah.
I'll bring it back over.
Just like no. He's David was also.
Yesterday, we were in Asheville. There were about 300 people at this hearing. Parents.
And it's screening.
Screening, yes.
Yeah.
And parents there are going to organize a walkout from schools demanding Wi-Fi continuity.
Wow.
This is a perfect community to organize that in smaller cities where everybody knows communication goes very well. Also, in terms of 5G, I don't know if this is true, but I read that the way the FCC is going to deal with is going to get around the increase in exposure. They're going to reclassify the human skin as an extremity. So that will provide a safe distance between the exposure of the skin and the inner organs. So this is how we can so we've already reclassified it here.
Yes, back was screaming at me. Yes, back.
I really glad you're talking about people actively fighting as a group, because maybe the suggestion you gave in your speech about how we as individual consumers can make different choices. This is not going to change by the choices of individual consumers. We have to act together, even as publicly owned. The reason they give us the Pretty Smart meters is that it will save money in 5 jobs. They're going to fire 5 local people with families, so that they can put smart meters in our homes and give our public money to out-of-state corporations instead of hiring these 5 local people who have jobs going to the
charging more for electricity.
And what's the value to us? We own.
As I said, there's zero value to us, and that's what the decision in New Mexico showed. And I wish I could organize it, but people here need to get organized, and that's what we're doing with Michigan for Safer Tech. And I think everyone should get organized and act together.
What are our next steps, like in terms of us getting organized as a group to make public action?
What I would do in terms of smart meters, I would get an attorney to start fight on your behalf with the Public Utility Commission, with the Health Department, and with the utility companies themselves. And as I said, there's excellent evidence to work with. You just need to do it effectively.
So we need to get together as a group and hire a lawyer.
That's what I would do. And not because I'm an attorney, because you need to, it's someone who would know the procedures, who would know what they're doing wrong. And it also really kind of like shows them a lot of seriousness. And I would also start educate the public and go door to door, get people educated, explain to people what it's doing, sign them on petition, get them to write a letter to their municipalities, to their congressmen saying we do not want this. Our state, in many states in the US right now, there are bills to give at least an analog choice option, so people can keep their analog meters. And your legislators will do that if they feel that there are a lot of people who support it. Another thing, as I said before, our legislators are saturated with lobbyists, but our side don't have a lobbyist. People need to start and go to the legislator, do the legwork. There's no way around it.
I would just like to address it from another point of view as us being social people, that I have avoided, I don't use a cell phone at all. And I'm not crazy myself, but I'm explaining about how when I speak to friends and people about it, they look at me like, how can you live in this modern world? And they assume that their time is so important that I need things in a split second. How can I do all this stuff? And so we don't have to go so quickly, and we've done it before. But it's now, what's interesting, even people who are wise, they now have children. They all have their phones. When I speak to them about, well, how could you let your kids play these games and do all this stuff? They go, well, they can't socialize, then their friends make bullies out of them. So it's like, even parents who are aware of it, they're telling their kids it's okay because they're no longer socializing.
Parents forget.
Parents must tell the kids to cool it and
Parents have to become parents again. I agree with you on the social impact. I think that what you see a lot of times is a lot of cognitive dissonance from parents. And I think the reason is just like you said, the amount of decisions they will have to make to change your life is too overwhelming for them. So it's easier for them just to try and push it away. As I said, they're not parents anymore. They give their children these devices, which are basically killing devices. Sorry for being so blunt. And the thing is, children are quite smart. They're actually smarter than their parents. And if you explain this to children, they get it. My sister gave my niece, 20-year-old niece, a cell phone. And of course, I was appalled by it. But all her friends have phones, so you cannot keep her without a phone. So I took my niece and said, come on. I put her in front of the laptop, and I said, Yarden, if you use a cell phone and you get sick, it will be you who will be in the hospital. It will be you who will have to go through treatments. It will be you who's suffering. So before you use that cell phone, you need to know what this cell phone can do to you. And so you be informed and make your own informed decision. So I put her in front of the computer. I showed her that image with the penetration of radiation to the brain. I showed her a McCain picture of the brain tumor, and she started having tears. And I asked her, do you want me to show you a picture of a child with a brain tumor? She said, no, I get it. So we actually can explain this in a way children understand it, and we must do that. And I think we'll discover that our children are pretty smart, not falling into this. And as I said, we have tools now to educate children and adults, including that movie Generations that could be useful. I agree with you. I'm horrified by the social impact. When I got sick and I moved to the Catskills, it was just the beginning of smartphones. 4 years later, I didn't leave the Catskills except once a month to buy food. So 4 years later, when I went to Israel to finish my Supreme Court case, I was actually in shock, seeing a whole completely different society. I was literally in shock. I found myself posting on Facebook more posts about the social impact than on the radiation. I remember going on the street and I see this couple walking, and both with coats and their head tinted and their hand like that. So I passed them and I said, guys, you're a really nice couple. Don't you want to talk to each other? You know what they said? Yes, we do. We text each other. So yeah, I agree. It's terrible, and they make us into a whole bunch of zombies. Yes.
We have a local group here in Eugene called Families for Safe Meters. And the other thing I'd like to say about the smart meters, they try to give you to think it saves money. Other areas that have smart meters, the bills only go up.
Right.
Everything about it is false.
It's false. They also have as an error rate in terms of calculating. In California, they tell people, well, now they are just calculating your electric use more correctly. They actually also have a lot of problems. Now, we have the data from Michigan. 572% higher rates of problems than they had with analog meters. And not just that, after they're all been they're defaulted and stuff, now they want to change them again and ask for another $50 million to change the meters, which is they just changed. And for that, they want clearly increase in rate for the consumer. So zero public benefit. There's ample evidence, including New Mexico decision. Yes?
Yeah, I worked at NUF for 11 years, and I read those meters, and I argued about every point. There's so many reasons not to put smart meters.
Right.
The analog meters can be fixed in-house or run by gears. These digital meters are like all this digital technology. Consumer trap. You have to keep upgrading.
Right.
And I said, it doesn't make sense to be spending $250 to $500 for 180,000 customers out there every 5 years. It only lasts about 5 years.
I had my electrical service updated 4 years ago. You have put on a digital meter, but it doesn't emit any Wi-Fi. And I can read it every day and see exactly how much energy it's using. So I've been happy with that. It's been tested by it.
How much do you pay for that?
I don't pay for it. It's
$50 a month.
No,
It doesn't have that information.
These meters cost, they last longer than a smart meter. The smart meters are going to, first of all, they're going to be really vulnerable also if they're done in electromagnetic poles. There's all the problems with smart meters, but I'm just saying, you don't have to have an analog meter right now. You can have a digital meter. And what's nice about a digital meter is you can read it exactly. So like what I've noticed in my house is that I have one appliance that uses a lot of electricity. It's my dryer. They're like a 20-year-old dryer. All my appliances are old, but it's just interesting. The dryer uses a lot of electricity.
Well, there are a lot of problems with those digital meters. One of the things it's creating, you may not be affected health-wise by it, you might. A lot of people who develop microwave chickens like myself are really suffering from them because they create something that is called dirty electricity. They put all kind of frequencies on our electric lines, which are pretty harmful, and people are suffering. So they are, I don't want to say as bad. I don't think that they're as bad as the wireless meters, but they're definitely not good. I would absolutely prefer to have the analog meters. Furthermore, there are a lot of inaccuracies and problems with those digital meters. In some states where they put the digital meters, it's essentially the same meter. They just disable the antenna in it. And many times when there's electric outage, etc., those antennas start to work again. So I cannot say I'm recommending the digital meters.
I'm extremely
sensitive
in terms of
Can I say something?
I'm just saying it's an option. It's an option here.
Yeah, but I think we should allow.
I measure it with my own body. And I'm just saying
they still track all your data.
Yes, they do. And they sell it.
There's a lot of confusion about the smart meters, folks. I'll tell you what, 9,000 AMR meters have already been installed. These are the ones that the people can sit out in the car or outside the dog where the dog is in the gate and they don't want the kids to be disturbed. 9,000 of those meters were already installed called AMR. Now they have 9,000 of the new U.S. Census, it's called Census USA Stratus, STRATUS. Well, let me tell you, those old AMR readers, they didn't put one word out there about the problems with radio frequency and health. In fact, I'm the one who discovered on the website they had a simple word, no. Are there any problems with radio frequency on eWeb's website? No. Then they took the word off after they started learning from Families for Safe Meters. We would have the radio mesh net today, 190,000 beacon signals per day per wireless smart meter. We're talking about yours and then the water and your next door neighbors. We don't have the radio mesh net. eWeb did not know what they were doing. But one thing you should know is that the Stratus meters, if your friends have them on, if the radio is off, because we morphed the technology specifically for Eugene, Oregon, it will say no in a little sign. But when it's on, you won't know that it's on. So that's one thing to be clear about. AMR meters they found out were emitting more than the new Census Stratus ones. One other thing that you may not be aware of, when Jeffrey Smith from the No GMO movement spoke here in Eugene, he showed the slide for autism, the very same slide that Dietrich Klinghardt showed a slide from Sophia Institute in Washington, in which the amount of autism seemed to increase with the amount of radio frequency microwaves in the smartphones. However, the very same slide was shown by Jeffrey Smith when the GM food lecture was given, and I seem to be the only one to have observed that both of these slides were parallel. Neither of the gentlemen speaking said they wanted to make a direct correlation with it, but it was a parallel thing. And there's a couple other things I have to say. Let's make it one question.
What about the cars? I understand they're really smart today. I haven't bought one in a long time.
Well, first of all, yes, cars are a problem. A lot of the cars use Bluetooth for your cell phone, and that should be disabled. Sometimes it's simple, and if you do it yourself, sometimes you have to go to the car company to disable the Bluetooth. I would not buy new cars. There's a lot of people who cannot handle them. They get sick from the cars, etc., etc. I suggest if you can buy older car, that's what I would do.
That you mentioned on your talk. Whenever I use my phone, like for a little, longer time, my head started twinkling. I was just getting my phone before you said that part, and I'm like, oh my God, I got scared, and I'm like, where is this? So I will feel like nausea, and my head will start twinkling, and it traveled to the side, in the back. I'm like, oh my God, okay, so I put my phone away.
Good.
And then I
Is that what you call next to your head? Or
no, looking at Facebook, looking at stuff and reading on my phone. Yes, I have it on me, in my hand sometimes. I will feel some twinkle on my face. I'm like, oh my God, what is this?
So that's a sign for you not to use your cell phone.
Yes, so
no way around
is it safe? My question is it safe if I'm off Wi-Fi or
all of it? All of it is radiation. You need to stop using it. I'll explain something.
And I also have kids, and now kids nowadays they love devices. I'm not from here. I'm from originally Ethiopia, and I was raised playing in the mud and the water puddle. I'm like, come on, go outside, play, but they love devices.
Are you a mother?
So, yes, a mother of two. Yeah, I don't give them my phone, but they have a tablet. So the tablet, is it safe if it doesn't have?
So I have the same thing. They're immediately, you can put them on airplane mode. You can disable the Wi-Fi. You can do all the same thing you do with your phone. It's the same as your cell phone, just bigger.
Can you plug it in?
So if even though the Wi-Fi is off, no Bluetooth, no internet connection at all, but they have a game download already.
Yes.
That is fine. That is safe.
So you can download things, you can download books, you can download games, you can download whatever it is that you want, and just use it when the iPad is on airplane mode.
Okay, and when you travel in the car, now everything is getting smart,
Then you can disable it because that's terrible.
So all the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are bad. Okay, thank you so much.
And I'm 3 feet from my meter if I get a smart meter, 3 feet at my kitchen table. If I put up a metal piece, will that help?
That would reduce the radiation from the meter going outside. The problem is that those meters put wireless frequencies into your electric lines, into the electricity in your home. So you're still going to have wireless going on in your house, even though you put a mesh outside of it. So again, it will block or reduce the radiation coming out from your meter going outside, but not necessarily help much to your personal situation.
Yeah. It's essential. If you put up a piece of metal, it's essentially and frequencies that are on the scale of this the piece of metal that you put up will cause it to oscillate and give off.
Yeah, that's true. So it actually can be more, that's what you're trying to say, that can be more harmful if you don't put it correctly. So metal is always, all of these shielding things are essentially a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, metal blocks radiation. On the other hand, metal can act as an antenna. It depends how you put it. That's what you're trying to say? Yeah. Right. So let's say a lot of people ask us about shielding, how they can shield their house. Like you have your neighbors with the Wi-Fi, and you want to shield your house from the Wi-Fi. So the way to do it is, it's complicated. So you can put there are materials you can put on your window. Most of the radiation will come into your house through the windows, not through the walls. So you can put shielding materials on your windows that will block radiation from coming inside. However, if you keep on using wireless devices inside your house, that will reflect back and actually can increase the radiation in your home. So I do not suggest people to put all these shielding materials alone. And definitely not, and definitely if you do it alone, you should have a wireless meter, like RF measuring meter, to make sure that you're actually reducing the radiation in your home, not increasing it. There are people who are called building biologists, and they are specialized in helping mitigating EMF, electromagnetic fields, and EMR, electromagnetic radiation in home. I suggest using them. To do that, again, because if you want to get better, you don't want to actually aggravate your situation if you do it incorrectly. So I'll be very careful. Another thing is, now they're producing various shielding fabrics and clothing. If you're not suffering from microwave sickness and electrosensitivity, do not buy them. Because I can tell you as a person who suffered from this that actually those shielding materials make me worse. And it's very easy to understand why, because those fabrics have metal in them. So they may block radiation coming from the outside, but remember our body is electric, it is emit frequencies, it's also blocking the body from having frequencies coming outside. Furthermore, let's say you're going to be outside and there is sun. The sun affects the electrons in the metal and it starts to move. So that creates effects on us as well. So unless you actually can feel radiation and feel that when you wear those fabrics, you feel better rather than worse, you cannot use them and you should not use them. Okay? Yes?
What about the
for cell phones?
For cell phones.
So I think those are, in my opinion, again, it's all my opinion, those would be good. So, because again, they have the cases for cell phone, that's what you're asking about, right? So they will block the radiation because they have metal, so that would be a good thing. You should know that when the cell phone is inside, it actually emits more radiation because it works harder to to connect to the cell tower, but still the metal case will block it. By the way, Bo, what's your experience with this? They're pretty effective, right? Yes. I never use one, but as far as, to my opinion, right now, that's the one recommendation I tell people, because many people want to put them in a pocket, as we heard today earlier. That's a bad idea. People put it in a bag, also a bad idea, close to your body, or various other things. So I would get those cases to the phones. I think that's actually a wise idea. Yes, sir.
I guess my takeaway, what I'm hearing, is that there are some simple things that we can do individually, but then it's very limited. And so, like, working together and stepping out in that way is really a good focus for energy.
I think I can tell you from my own experience, I got very sick from it, very, very sick. And people ask me a lot of times, what did I do to get better? So I moved to the country, the avoidance, I did different things to my body, trying to strengthen it. But I also tell people that being a victim is not good, and actually fighting back, I think that helped a lot to my recovery. And by the way, as for the Wi-Fi case in Israel that we led, we lost it. But through that case, we lost it not because we didn't prove the evidence. We won the first stage of the case, because it means we proved the evidence. Long story short, we did force the government to adopt limitations on the Wi-Fi use. In Israel, Wi-Fi is banned up to the age of 6. It's allowed 1 hour grades 1 to 3. It's allowed 1 to 2 hours grades 4 to 6. It was basically the first country in the world that adopted limitations on Wi-Fi. Now, the best country in terms of limitations on Wi-Fi is Cyprus. In 2017, they banned Wi-Fi in schools completely. And thank you. And France also has some limitations. In the US, there is a committee appointed by the governor of Maryland, and they actually conducted an evaluation of this issue. They had 4 doctors on a panel. And in December 2016, they published a report that says that wired internet should be preferred in schools. The exposure of children to this radiation should be limited and minimized. Nevertheless, the state of Maryland did nothing about it, and neither any of the other states. And another thing, guys, you have a wonderful doctor here by the name of Dr. Paul Dart, who is a doctor to a lot of people here who suffer from microwave sickness. He's also giving really good presentation on these issues. I know the science really, really well, so you're really lucky. Furthermore, as I mentioned before, we have one of the leading scientists in the US on this issue, Dr. Martin Pall, in the state of Oregon. He lives in Portland. He actually published, Pall, P-A-L-L. And he actually just published 2 papers. One of them is on 5G, and the other one, he summarized the science on the effects of Wi-Fi. And by the way, there's about 150 studies showing the adverse health effects of Wi-Fi and the frequencies that are using for Wi-Fi technology. Yes, ma'am.
I know a family here in Eugene who are from Germany, and they're not at all alternative people. They don't have wireless in their home. And I'm wondering if you know if the awareness is higher.
Well, yes and no. So I think I have a lot of friends in Germany. So Germany East Germany and West Germany. East Germany, basically all the Soviet Union accepted the harms already in the 60s. They already then admitted that there are non-thermal effects of microwave radiation. And actually, my ex-husband is from Romania, and every person I know from Eastern Europe know about it. My best friend is from Russia. Her mother is aeronautic engineer, the equivalent of NASA. And when I told her that I'm sick, she said, yes, we know all about it. Take a shower, ground yourself, blah, blah, blah. So they know all about it. That is East Germany. When Germany became united again, actually the Germans had the best scientists in East Germany. They asked him to review the science and tell them whether wireless technology would be harmful. That scientist, his name is Dr. Hecht, and his report concluded that absolutely this is harmful. They buried his report, had another person write in the report. And I don't know how many of you, I guess a lot of you are interested in the effects on the environment. There's a wonderful report that was written by German scientists. It's called Bees, Birds, and Mankind. In the email that I'm going to send, there'll be a link to it. And, I'm a beekeeper, and bees navigate based on EMF and communicate based on EMF. And as you know, there's a colony collapse, and I believe that is the reason. And there's a lot of science about it. Same goes to birds. Actually, the US government admitted that the radiation from cell towers is responsible for the problem with the migrations of birds. And they actually wrote a letter to that effect and also wrote that the FCC guidelines are 30 years obsolete. But that report is fascinating, very well done. Hecht is one of the scientists that were involved in it. Professor von Klitzing, which I mentioned earlier, also involved with it. I recommend reading it and using it for your advocacy efforts. And by the way, right now the German government is lying just like the rest of them. People are sick with microwave sickness. They say, well, they have a burnout syndrome. That's in all over Europe. There's now an increase in the burnout syndrome. People just cannot handle life. Yes.
I've done some research on combined effects of various chemicals and electromagnetics, and it seems like that ties into like even the way that certain drugs are being developed as they're using RF, like you said, for delivery systems, and I think that ties in with even with bees navigation and
well, of course, there's a lot of cross effects. There's actually studies showing that the millimeter waves affect the way we absorb antibiotics. So there's a lot. Of course, we are electric and chemical beings, and there'll be a lot of effects that one will affect the other, and our susceptibility to it. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I've also for the last 10 years been importing a line of really kind of strange products from Germany that affect the modulation of the frequencies, and they really I know it's like a strange product because it's not a blocker of radiation, but people do give a lot of good reports. I don't think it's ultimately a solution for these problems.
There's a lot of products out there in the market. Some people put stickers on the cell phone, etc. All of those stickers, the stickers I found, I tried, had no effect. And also, it doesn't make sense to me that a sticker would have effect. And every such sticker that I went to their science, it's all sound pretty non-scientific to me. But I want to say, there's a lot of things I do not understand, and I don't presume to understand. I know that's like people who sell pendants and stuff. I know very people I trust and appreciate who say that those things help them. I cannot negate it. I can tell only on things I try and things that make sense to me, and most of those things that I tried did not. But again, I don't know exactly the products. I mean, that is for you. Yeah, ma'am.
I know Dr. Martin Falk has done some research about this blocking the acid.
Yeah, the VGCC. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he did his studies. I think he summarized, right? But he summarized studies that were done, and he claims that is a mechanism involved in the creation of sickness from this radiation. Yeah. He has a lot of papers about this. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think about a canopy at night for shielding the bed with shielding fabric?
Yeah, so again, all of those things should be carefully installed. They should be grounded, etc. I know people who feels wonderful. I know for me doesn't work. So all of those again, all of those materials, shielding materials are double-edged sword. I guess there'll be a lot of reasons why it would work or not work. I cannot give you a finite answer to that. I'm sorry. For me, it doesn't work. I know a lot of people that it saves their lives. So.
Well, what about painting the bedroom?
Same. So there's paint that you can paint your room, and it's supposed to block radiation. Again, all of those things should be done correctly with someone who is able to measure the radiation before and after accurately and make sure it's done correctly. Again, some people, I know that it really helped. I know a friend of mine in Germany didn't work so much, but again, because let's say you have radiation coming from your neighbors from the floor, if you live in an apartment complex, and then the radiation starts to reflect back inside your house. So it depends on the circumstances. It depends if you're in an apartment, if you're in a house, if the electricity in your house is well, whatever comes to your house, do it right. I mean, I would not do those things without building biologists, making sure that it's done right and it's actually helping. And again, you can reduce most of the radiation by shielding your windows, and I think that will be cheaper and easier. Again, as long as you do not use wireless in your home.
Question. You mentioned that there was a class action lawsuit by brain tumor families, and that it was defeated, and that it can't go forward. So.
No, not exactly. Do you want me to correct you now or when you?
Basically, I want to know where it is and what's happening, and if these people are thrown away or.
Okay, so it was not defeated. There are 29 brain tumor cases right now in courts in the U.S. for 13 years. So the wireless industry, we have an industry with so much money, with very deep pockets, they will use every trick in the book to postpone and delay and delay and postpone. So They were trying to make this lawsuit into a class action lawsuit, and that was rejected because Section 704 of the Telecommunication Act. So as I said before, people can join that lawsuit if they got their brain tumors before 1996. If you got your brain tumor after, you cannot join the lawsuit. Now, as for the status of this case, there is something called an evidentiary hearing. So the wireless industry claims there's no evidence to our side, so they conducted an evidentiary hearing to check if there is evidence. And the court ruled, yes, there is evidence. Then there's sufficient evidence to take the cases into the next step. So then the wireless industry appeal claimed that the standard, the legal standard they used to evaluate the evidence was incorrect. They used the Frey standard instead of the Daubert standard. So now it's back to the trial court. They have to go through evidentiary hearing again with the Daubert standard. Now we have the NTP study. I have a feeling they're going to pass it. So so I'm very optimistic. Because of the NTP study, it's done. So they have the evidence. They cannot say there's no evidence. Yes. So in order for us to, we need to basically challenge Section 704 to get other people to be able to sue. Yes, ma'am.
One mentioned that as well as the invisible rainbow that's going around by Arthur,
yes,
which is an excellent specific research.
Oh, excellent.
And he's a leading researcher and advocate for these topics. There's also Dr. Martin Blank, who wrote Overpowered, and he's the leading spokesperson for EMFscientists.org, which submitted an appeal to the United Nations regarding these issues. And there are several, there's many signatory countries and individual.
There's 200 scientists submitted an appeal to put a moratorium on 5G. They said the evidence is conclusive and there's already a pandemic of sickness that we need to address before moving forward with anything. This is the book by Arthur Firstenberg. He's a very dear colleague. He got sick from this radiation when he was in medical school. He has a physics and mathematics degree in his background. He's the best attorney, non-attorney I know. He's the best scientist I know to evaluate scientists. He's the best statistician I know. Brilliant guy, and this book also proves that he's the best, one of the best writers I know. It's a fascinating book. It's called Invisible Rainbow, and it's like his life project. And the data there is fascinating, and it's really, really well written. So I recommend reading this book. Last question. Yes.
What are your thoughts about mineral and nutrient deficiencies as a contributing factor to electrosensitivity?
I'm not a doctor, so I'm not the person to ask these questions. I can tell you from my experience, I try not to overload my body with anything. I think that our body have a natural way, it's designed to try and heal. And I think when people's body is crashing with microwave sickness, when we don't know exactly what got harmed, because apparently microwave sickness is not one condition, it's various conditions that just manifest in the same way, more or less, and are caused by the same thing, the radiation. Like Bell Palm studies show that some people had a broken blood-brain barrier, some people had immune system problems, some had Solomon's problem. So I would not want, and I didn't overload my body with things, and I think that's why I was able to get better. I would be very careful with my body. Avoidance should probably be the best thing to do, and then slowly improve those weak links in your body and strengthen your body.
I mean, the only reason I bring it up is that we're living in an age where there's so much like gut dysfunction and problems with nutrition in our society. So when we have that going on at the same time as we have this other factor.
Strengthen your body. I think every person should find the ways that work for them.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate it.